Hey guys, I'm back on the Forerunner server and we're going to be taking a look at two new heroes, both of whom are defenders and both of them are defense scaling. And one of them is actually an epic, so we're getting more epic heroes finally, as that's kind of been a bit of a bone of contention. So we'll start things off with the epic. It is this lovely lady here, Drayga. She is for the Nightmare faction. Let's have a quick look at her base stats. The HP is reasonable, the defense is pretty good. I think a cost of 18 is kind of average, and besides that everything else is fairly average. 3 block, 60 revive time, and with 1 tile attack range. So moving on to Drayga's kit, there's nothing too special to say about her base stats really. So she scales off of defense, her damage scales off of defense, and her basic attacks have a 30% chance to restore 5% of her HP. So she has some pretty good self-sustain built into just her talent immediately, which is nice. She can hold herself potentially for a little while. She has 100% damage to one enemy basic attack. It is normal damage, so it's a physical damage type. Her ultimate Unwavering Grit, it has a 600 rage cap and it lasts for 25 seconds. It is manually activated, and upon activation it gives you 15 to 25% max HP and 15 to 25% defense increase. Just so you know, when things work like this, like defense or attack increases applied in battle, it's always your total amount as far as I'm aware from what I've seen so far. So this will be 15% bonus of whatever her current is. So yeah, after her gearing and all other effects, artifacts are in play. That's still not a great amount though. It's 25% HP and defense. It doesn't really mean a lot. I mean, obviously she scales on defense, so that's basically the equivalent of 25% attack. So that's kind of cool. And then her passive Deterrence, 8-second cooldown. Attack up to 3 enemies ahead, inflicting 150 up to 200% damage, and it inflicts a 20% damage reduction. So it reduces the damage they do by 20%. That's quite interesting. It lasts for 4 seconds, but it has a 50% uptime. So that's an interesting way of doing it. It's a different way of reducing the enemy's damage done. I'm not sure exactly where in the formula that would fall. I'm guessing it would be at the end, similar to how a damage buff would be applied, so this won't be negating the enemy's attack before it goes into anything else. So it's decent, but it's not insane. I think it is pretty good. My main hang up with Drayga so far, from just having a quick look at her kit, it's just kind of, there's nothing like, there's no big card, there's no like crazy power she has. She can apply a damage reduction with a 50% uptime on 3 targets. That's pretty cool. She can deal damage, which is nice for a defender, but she's an epic, so her stats aren't going to be crazy high. Also, she's a Nightmare faction, so she's not going to be gaining benefits from a typical defensive team. Normally, if you're using a Nightmare team, it's more in an aggressive content such as Guild Wars, not in Gear Raid 2. So yeah, I'm mixed on her. And her ultimate granting these stats is nice, but it doesn't boost allies. So yeah, I'm uncertain. She could be pretty good somewhere like Artifact Material Raid, because she can debuff the boss, but you can't plan when this applies. It's automatic. And with a 50% uptime, there's a good chance that you miss the window where the boss uses Slashing Blitz and annihilates everyone. But she scales on defense, which is good. She can restore her own HP with a chance. So she's just an interesting kit, but not crazy and not awful. So Awakenings, let's see if this changes things. The first one increases the duration by 4 seconds. So now it's 100% uptime on her damage reduction. That becomes a 8-second debuff of 20% damage reduction. That becomes pretty good. For a first Awakening, that's quite good. Second Awakening is 100 flat hit defense. Third Awakening is damage reduction of 20% while ultimate is active. Now we're talking. Bearing in mind her ultimate lasts for 25 seconds, so that's quite a good duration. And she's also permanently reducing the enemy's damage done by 20%. Awakening 4 is more defense, and Awakening 5 is when the talent is triggered, so when she does the lifesteal, she gains 15% defense for 5 seconds. And this triggers on her attacks. So it's only a 30% chance. You would need to have quite good attack speed, and with a base interval of 2.6, it would be hard to make this reliably maintained. But overall, her Awakenings are good, especially the first 3. 1 and 3 are quite nice, I think, and it makes her overall a decent defender that can do some good damage and reduce the damage done by the boss. So I haven't tested her. This is entirely just my preliminary thoughts, but Drayga seems decent. She doesn't seem insane, but she seems pretty decent, and I do like the fact that she can reduce the enemy's damage done. It'll be interesting to see how that scales with someone like Brokir or other defenders or even healers who reduce damage taken on your team, to see how those two play with each other. I do know, however, that when we deal damage to an enemy with very high resistance or mitigation, the minimum is still 5%, and that applies the other way as well. So if we are massively reducing the enemy's damage done and increasing our resistances and defense, it's still going to be capped at a minimum of 5% of its total damage. So I don't think defense scaling heroes do incredibly well because of this. You can't like really crush their damage into nothing. It will be capped at a minimum of 5%. So, I mean, that's not, obviously that's very low, but still it's something to go against it slightly. So yeah, first thoughts on Drayga is she seems decent, but because she doesn't have anything crazy in her kit as a standout, I don't know that I would use her over other heroes. But if I did pull her, especially if I was a progressing player, I would definitely be happy enough to use her. And it could well be that due to the way this damage reduction mechanism works, it could have some interesting uses in future. But for the time being, it just seems kind of nice and decent, but nothing crazy. So overall, especially with her faction, I'm not very impressed with Drayga, but we'll see how she is when she hits the global server and I get a bit more time playing with her. So finally, we have Krodor. He is a legendary defender. I really like his model, actually. The one we just looked at, her model is, of course, already existing as a rare hero. It's kind of like a recolor. So Krodor is a new model, which I quite like. I think he's really cool. He's like a proper troll, hill giant kind of character. And yeah, he looks good. I like his design quite a lot. So yeah, good design, and let's see what he can do. Normal damage type, let's have a look at his base stats. Very good base HP, nearly 30,000 base HP is actually one of the highest in the game. Not quite the highest, Abomination is still higher, and so is Elder, just about. Elder you probably don't know yet, but he's a second North faction lord. So yeah, he's got really good base HP, but it's not the highest, but it's very close to being the highest in the game. So really good base HP. Pretty decent on his other stats as well. A cost of 19 is kind of average, maybe a little expensive for a defender. Actually, probably around average. Free block is standard, and a 60-second revival time. His attack interval of 2.4 seconds is a little bit fast, so that's cool. So let's take a look at what he can actually do. So his talent, his damage scales off of defense as well. His defense increases by 2% for 20 seconds whenever he takes damage, and it caps at 10 stack at 20% defense increase. So that's actually quite good. 20% defense after taking 10 hits, and the stacks last for 20 seconds. So it's pretty good. Base stack is 100% to one target. His ultimate iron defense is 1,000 rage cap reduced to 900 with max skill ups, and you start with 400 rage, and it has a duration of 15 seconds, which goes up to 20 seconds. It increases your block value by 2 and defense by 70%, and it lasts for 15 seconds. So max skill, this is a 2 block bonus, 100% defense increase, and a 20-second duration. So that's pretty huge. That's a massive amount of defense increase. That's a lot of extra block, and it's a 20-second duration. So that's very powerful as ults go. It is a high rage cap though, so you're not going to have this up very often. And the way these work is while your ult is active with a duration, usually it's ticking down on the rage bar, so you can't generate rage while the ult is active. So it's quite a long downtime on this ult, but while it's active, not only is he getting massively tankier, he's blocking more enemies, and he's dealing more damage. 100% defense increase is actually pretty crazy, so he could do some good damage potentially. Then for his passives, we have Braveheart. Once his health drops below 30%, he immediately enters a state of anger. He bellows at up to 10 enemies ahead and inflicts attack reduction on them. So this is a big thing, which we'll get to after. So the next 5 basic attacks change into striking, and they hit up to 10 enemies, dealing 150% AoE damage, and they inflict a stun. A 2-second stun at that, so that's pretty big. So an AoE up to 10 enemies stun for 2 seconds each. The ultimate is not available during this stage, and the effect can only be triggered 1 time per deployment. So you have to either undeploy him or let him die and replace him in future to be able to do it again in the same combat. So with skill ups, this increases from 150% up to 240% AoE damage. That's pretty crazy. And it goes from 5 attacks doing this AoE to 7 attacks dealing this AoE damage. So that's actually pretty insane. That is quite a lot of damage to quite a lot of targets and a lot of stun. So yeah, he seems pretty good to me. That seems really good to me. And interestingly, I don't know if I'd want to build him with attack speed, really, because you want him to maximize this. I would want to maximize the stuns at a glance. I've not tested him, but at a glance, I would want to maximize his stun time. And if you build him with too much attack speed, then you'll overlap the stuns a lot. So I'd probably get his attack interval down to 2.1, 2.2, and then try with that to see if you can just stun things for 14 seconds. That would be kind of crazy, right? 240% damage 7 times with a 14-second stun on 10 enemies just seems mental to me. So there's 2 more things to mention with Braveheart that stand out very, very strikingly. The first is the Bellow, reducing the enemy's attack by 20%. This is pretty big because this attack is then going to meet your ally's reduction, so whatever their defense scaling is. and that's going to really hit their damage output quite heavily. It's better to have attack reduction than damage reduction. It sounds counterintuitive, but that's the way the formula works. So we saw on the Epic Defender that she reduces damage, whereas Krodor reduces attack. The reason it's attack on Krodor and not damage is because this is more effective. It will then be hit by our resistances and then finally other mitigations. So this is going to be a lot more impactful than damage reduction. And the final thing to mention is the biggest thing with Braveheart, and that is it only applies once you drop below 30% HP. So you have no control over when this happens. And considering he scales on defense and actually has crazy base HP, him dropping below that amount of HP is not really going to happen easily, and you're not really going to be able to control it. So yeah, it's on the face of it, I would say this 30% threshold being the requirement is a problem for him. It makes him very unreliable. It makes him hard to control, and I think a lot of the time it will be hard for this to ever actually proc. I can imagine in Arena this will basically never proc. He's just not going to take that much damage, especially if he's also doing as much damage as he is. If he's got this much defense scaling on taking damage, I don't see this proccing that often. And by the time it's procced, it's too late, and maybe it's not the right timing. Yeah, I think if this can proc in a different way, I think he would be potentially insane. Alright, so let's move on to his final passive, Unity Strength. Based on the number of adjacent allies, increases physical damage reduction and damage dealt. The effect reaches a maximum of 12% when there are 3 allies in range, and this will increase by another 12% as well with max skill up, so it goes up to 24% damage reduction to physical damage and 24% damage done increase. So pretty good. He's not going to have any trouble overcoming the enemy's resistance threshold. He scales on defense. His defense is 3.8k, which is not crazy high. It is lower than a fighter's attack, but it's higher than a lot of mages' attack. So with 100% self buff on defense, as well as 20% from his talent, he'll actually be able to overcome most enemies' resistances. He'll be fine on that front. So damage will actually scale really well on him. And the physical damage reduction is really nice as well. 24% physical damage reduction is crazy on top of all this defense with the health pool he has, which would further exacerbate the problem of Braveheart not proccing. So at a glance, I think he's probably decent, but I think he's nowhere near as good as he could be if you could actually reliably use Braveheart. I don't know how you get this to trigger really. So yeah, that's my impressions of him so far. I have heard that people are not super fond of him so far on the Forerunner server. I haven't heard a great deal about the details, and like I said, unfortunately I haven't had a chance to test these guys yet, but I'm pretty confident it's due to Braveheart just not being able to be procced at will, and I think it's probably just really hard to get him to actually trigger that, because he's not gonna, with building him in defense gear, with all these stacks, with this massive base HP, I don't see him hitting 30% or lower HP that easily. So yeah, that's my first impressions of Krodor's skills. I do think he seems pretty cool. I'm actually quite interested in him. I think it'd be cool if they gave him a 2-tile attack range. I get that it's not very necessary. He's already quite strong. But I mean, he's a big ass troll. Like, just give him 2 tiles attack range. Besides that, he is part of the North faction, which is a pretty good faction for a defender. The best faction for a defender, arguably. So I think that's solid. Overall, a pretty good kit. Great stats. Damage reduction, control, AoE control, defense scaling, damage dealer, AoE damage dealer, attack reduction. He's got a lot in his kit. He really has a lot in his kit. He just needs a way to proc Braveheart, because so much of his kit is in this one talent. Without this talent procking, this passive procking, he gets defense and block, and he gets some damage reduction and damage bonus, which isn't awful, but I mean, he would be real good if this could proc reliably. Alright, so let's move on to his awakenings. The first awakening. When gaining shields, the shield strength increases by 20%. So this is obviously very heavily into the North faction territory. So it's a huge shield, he has crazy defense, it's going to be great. Second awakening is defense, of course. Third awakening is during the state of anger, so when he drops below 30% HP for the first time after being deployed. Basic attacks also restore 50 rage. I think he had a pretty high rage cap. He does. So that's good. I mean, 50 rage is a lot, so that's actually pretty good. But yeah, it's a big rage cap, but that's still very nice. So the fourth awakening, 8% damage reduction, that's quite good. Pretty standard for defenders. And finally, the state of anger now has a cooldown of 60 seconds instead of per deployment. That's pretty crazy. Again, we need to be able to proc it more reliably, but a 60-second cooldown is pretty crazy. So yeah, I think he's pretty cool. I think he's cool. I do like him a lot. I really like his kit. I just have a hang up about the Braveheart passive. I think it could be fantastic if you had a way to trigger it at will, or it was easier to proc. But yeah, it just seems insanely strong. It seems really strong. I just don't know how you get it to proc when you need it to, or, you know, it just seems super tanky. So I'm interested in him. He has great base stats. He has great ultimate for the bonuses. I would definitely build him as more of a DPS with 2 defense mains and a crit damage main and pick up crit rate in the subs. I just think it'll be fun. He has AoE damage potential, right? He has all this bonus defense. He even has bonus damage. So I definitely would pick up some crit damage on him, because I think that's the piece he's missing if you want to go more damage focused on him, because he's already getting loads of bonus defense, like loads of bonus defense, and he's gaining some good damage bonus as well. So I would probably build him in an Infernal Raw set with 2 defense bonuses and 1 crit damage bonus, and pray that I can somehow trigger the Braveheart. So that is it. I'll cap the video off here. I think that's all we'll go over in this one, because it's already kind of a long waffle about Krodor. It's cool to see more diversity of heroes. It's cool to see more defenders. They are both defense scaling. Drayga was not super impressive, but I think she has some room to be pretty good. I can't think exactly where I would use her at the moment, but I think if I was progressing and I pulled her, I would definitely use her. And her awakenings do really grant her some more usage. Krodor, I think, is a decent defender. His base stats are crazy. He has an interesting toolkit and he scales on defense in a really powerful way given the rest of his skills. I think it's just maybe he needs to be tweaked on his Braveheart. We'll see if the developers do make changes to it or not. But maybe I'm overlooking something obvious. I just don't see how you get this to proc, and especially get it to proc when you would want it to. But it seems incredibly strong. So yeah, he seems like a pretty good hero. Maybe there'll be tweaks in future. We'll see what happens. But yeah, Krodor seems really interesting to me, so I'm very curious to see how he plays. Anyway, that's it for this video. I'm going to cap it off now. There is another hero I'll be going over in a separate video, which is this guy, Kai. So we'll look forward to that. I haven't looked at him at all yet, but I'm pretty sure he's a crossover from Monster Hunter by the look of his skin. But anyway, I'll save that for the next one. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Take care, and bye-bye.